guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the excavation of human remains. It is probably one of the most controversial topics in archaeology because people have a lot of opinions about it, and today I just kind of want to talk about the ethics around it, like how we go about doing it, why we go about doing it, because there's a lot of questions in terms of that. I'm just going to warn you now, this is probably going to end up being a longer video for me. Since it's something that I actually feel very strongly about, I might get a bit ranty. I'm going to try not to, but you've been warned. Now, for those of you who haven't watched any of my other videos, I am a professional archaeologist in the world of commercial archaeology working in the UK. I have a master's degree in human osteoarchaeology, so basically I have a master's degree in actually excavating human remains and analysis and all that kind of stuff. It is a very sensitive topic because people have a lot of moral and religious issues around the basically disinterment of the dead, whether or not we should or shouldn't be doing it, and of course the professionalism and how well it is being done. So basically the reason I decided to make this particular video now is because it is something that actually came up in, like, I would say the world of archaeology news in the UK a couple weeks ago. It got me quite fired up. I felt very passionately about what was going on, and I was going to make a video maybe 2 weeks ago about it, but I just felt like I wasn't articulating myself very well. And I don't want to go on just like a rant. I want to kind of break things down and try and make it accessible for people. So I took some time to kind of think about what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, and that's what I'm going to try and do for you today. Basically what happened is a guy living down south in England found out that there was a commercial cemetery excavation going on during a development in the area that he was already unhappy about happening. And so he went to the site, he took some photos, and then put a post on Facebook saying that he was very unhappy with this. He accused the council and the developer of covering up the excavation. He called into question if it's a commercial development, that means they're being put under pressure, it might be not getting done properly, and this is all a big cover-up. Why hasn't there been any engagement in the news? And he ended it with a call for people to basically get involved to prevent what he thought was going on from happening, which was basically a cover-up of a nationally significant archaeological find. A lot of people were sharing it. It showed up actually multiple times on my Facebook news feed, and then eventually it got picked up by the news and it went out through multiple outlets, including BBC. The overall coverage, I would say, was very negative. The implication in a lot of these stories was that things were being done improperly or whatnot, even though the council had a rebuttal, but I'll talk about that later. The thing that really got me for one of the stories was that they had a professor of archaeology at a university do a comment saying that the entire thing was almost scandalous, keyword almost, but made no mention of the fact that he's not actually an osteo specialist. He's just an archaeologist. And he's not a commercial archaeologist, he's an academic archaeologist, so this actually isn't really his field of expertise at all. And thirdly, he was a consultant on a show called Bone Kickers. I find it really ironic that they asked somebody to comment on a story where people were upset about the excavation of human remains by a guy who consulted on a show literally called Bone Kickers. Am I the only one that finds the irony there? Just saying. Anyway, I don't want to turn this into a witch hunt or anything negative towards the original poster. I just want to try and take down his complaints and break them down and explain basically why he is incorrect on all his accusations that he's made. The reason why this all kind of got me really fired up is that any archaeologist would have looked at the photos, which by the way were illegal because he trespassed onto site to take them, would have known that this is being done properly and that they're actually following due diligence on this site. If they weren't doing things properly, you probably wouldn't have known about it, or the developer would have just taken a bulldozer and bulldozed everything to the side, and you would have found all the bones all disarticulated and jumbled up in a spoil heap. That's doing things improperly. This was being done properly. But the way that things went about, it made it seem like it wasn't. And it just creates a bad reputation and a bad feeling and creates more distrust between archaeologists, developers, and the public. And it's just not helpful. I just want to point out, like I said, I'm not trying to do a witch hunt against this person or be particularly rude to them, but I just want to say that if this person had contacted the developer of the site, the council, any archaeological company, not just the one that was excavating, and asked and voiced these concerns, he would have had a similar probable explanation to what I had. And he did do a follow-up post where he said that commercial archaeologists had contacted him and explained what was going on, were very respectful. But the thing is that instead of kind of trying to inform himself before he made this post, he just decided to make a very inflammatory thing that was going to get a lot of attention, which might have been his agenda or not, I don't know. But the thing is, a lot of these situations can be solved by just like talking to people. Either way, all this illustrates to me is that people clearly don't really know a lot about this topic and the laws and regulations that surround it, particularly in the UK. So the first complaint that was here was that there's nothing in the press. And he was complaining that this was a nationally significant pre-Christian site because I guess there was a settlement nearby, and this, he was assuming, was associated with it, and in his opinion, the fact that there had been nothing in the local press about it, that meant that this was a cover-up. And I'm just gonna flat out say, no, that's not the case. First off, I should point out that the developer is the one who's in control of this site, and there's nothing in their contract that actually says they are supposed to report these things to the press. They're supposed to report them to the proper authority, but they are under no obligation to release this information to the public. A lot of the time nowadays, people try to publicize these things, but the important thing is that they want to control it. And in this case, this is really important because it is a cemetery excavation. It is the excavation of human remains. This is a sensitive topic, and it needs to be handled correctly. It is standard practice within a commercial archaeological excavation to not publicize anything most of the time until you finish excavating. And human remains are no exception, and I would say they're almost even they would take even further steps to try and keep things quiet until the excavation has finished. And this is a concern with site security. So if you've watched my video talking about digging up gold and all the concerns with that, human remains is a very similar thing, because people think pre-Christian burials, they think they're going to be buried with a lot of gold, a lot of ostentation, and the minute that this word gets out, you're immediately at danger for what's called night hawking, which is people with metal detectors coming onto site and looking for valuables that they can sell on the black market or melt down, whatever, and thereby you are compromising the site. And night hawkers don't care if they are disturbing a burial. They just like jumble everything up, they destroy all the archaeological information. Subsequently, they basically destroy this person. Alternately, you are also then, not just from night hawkers, but you are also at risk for just basic vandalism. I've heard stories or read stories about people coming onto cemetery sites like kids and kicking skulls around, or they play with the bones. They come onto site after you finished, and you know, while it would be nice to be able to afford a security guard and CCTV on every archaeological site, that's just not realistic. So our way of trying to mitigate our risk is to kind of keep it quiet. But that doesn't mean that these things aren't going to be published eventually. So it's all likelihood is that they were going to publicize this find with proper photos and, you know, a written article and stuff like that after the excavation had finished to preserve their security on site, and then to talk about it with the public. And this guy just basically wasn't patient enough for that to happen. The second thing that he talked about, which really annoyed me, was he was implying through the way he worded things that because this was a commercial excavation and there was going to be some rush or pressure from the developer to do things quickly, that therefore things weren't going to be done properly. And again, that's not true. I think this comes from the impression that people have that if you want things done quickly, they can't be done properly. And that's not necessarily true. This site, while I'm not personally acquainted with it, but based on my other experiences, I know that they will have a deadline for when the developer wants them to finish on site. But that doesn't mean that the developer just gives them an ambiguous, like, this is just the date that they've decided on and that's it. No, this will be something that's agreed with the council, agreed with the developer, agreed with the archaeological company, based upon a realistic expectation of work. So this deadline will be based upon an estimate, the extent of this cemetery that they think there is, and then how many skeletons they think can be excavated a day. Standard within the industry is usually about 1 skeleton excavated per day, but that can change depending. Some skeletons aren't very complete, so you might only have someone from the waist up. If you're using more of a digitally based recording system, which is, it can be faster, so that could have an effect as well. But generally this is what they will be basing their deadline on, not just the developer being like, well, I need to be in here by this time. Like, that's not how it happens. Additionally, the people that were excavating this site are a professional archaeological company. They're a well-regarded professional archaeology company. They'll actually have had to get a Ministry of Justice license in order to excavate these remains. You can't just come into a site and excavate them willy-nilly in England. You actually have to get permission to do so. Part of this license will be that you actually have to have this done by trained professionals. You can't just have anybody come on site and doing it. While I wouldn't say it's a necessarily super complicated process to excavate human remains, it definitely is something that you need to be trained to do. We are, as archaeologists, very aware that people take things like the excavation of skeletons and their ancestors very seriously, and they can be very emotional about it. But I want people to remember that we take it very seriously as well. This is our job. We chose to go into this. We studied for years. It's our passion. We don't want to do it incorrectly. And while, yes, there will be sometimes situations where there's pressure from a developer, that doesn't necessarily automatically mean that we are then going to compromise everything. If you are interested in knowing more about this, there is the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, or CIFA. They actually have a guide that they make, which they publish, that is the standard for excavating human remains in the UK. So I will put it in the description below if any of you feel like looking into it and reading it. Third complaint. This could come earlier, but it's kind of, my explanation is based upon the 2 previous points that I've already covered. Separate from the cover-up, the poster was also complaining about the fact that there was no community involvement on this site. I agree in that if it's possible to have community involvement, that would be ideal. But we have to be realistic, and this isn't something that we can do on every single site in the UK, because then we would never get anything done. Additionally, as I was saying, the license that you get for excavation requires trained professionals to do this excavation. And I'm sorry, but a volunteer is not a trained professional, and therefore they cannot just come onto every site, especially sites where you have human remains. It doesn't mean that it never happens. You do have volunteer digs where they will dig up burials in the UK, but it just generally, doing like a volunteer dig during a commercial excavation is not very common, and especially won't happen during the excavation of human remains, because like I said, you need to be a professional in order to do it. As per the rules. While he wasn't very specific, I know that there might be a complaint that there wasn't perhaps like an open day or like an effort to kind of have the community around and come onto site. And again, that's just going to be circumstantial. Again, ties into this whole site security thing where we don't really want to be advertising this stuff until afterwards. Open days on commercial sites do happen, but it has to be a very certain set of circumstances, in that, you know, the client has to be happy for it to be happening, and they have to be happy for you to either stop work on a work day to do this, or if you're hosting it on a weekend, you know, the employees have to be happy to work on a weekend. These are also a lot of the times active construction sites. Usually to be on an active construction site in general, you need to have a CSCS card if you're working there. Even if you're a visitor, you have to get a full induction, you have to wear all the PPE, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of hoops that you have to jump through in order to be working around them, and they can be dangerous because there's giant holes in the middle of the ground. You don't want people falling into them. Like I said, the schedule for this site will have an impact on whether or not you have an open day, and money. And I know people don't like to be told that, you know, money is a priority in this, but that is just the reality of the way the world is, that money does matter. And we can't afford to constantly stop what we're doing to make the public happy. And the way that we try to kind of bridge that is to do it afterwards. So there are examples of commercial excavations who have found something that's nationally significant, of doing like exhibitions or museum things or open days at their offices for people to come in and see things after an excavation is finished, and doing it sometimes on their own dime, or sometimes doing it via public funding, or the client is generous enough to pay for it as well. But all of these factors have to be in place. So the fourth thing I'm going to talk about is not necessarily the post itself, but is a couple things I saw in the original comments on it, which was a lot of people wondering like, why are they doing this? Why can't they just leave these people be? Can't we just let them rest in peace? And comments of a similar vein. And now I would just like to start off by saying that in general, when it comes to development, if they know a cemetery is somewhere, they will do what they can to avoid disturbing those people. However, we don't know where all the cemeteries are in the UK, mostly because we've only been registering it since, for a couple hundred, maybe about 1,000 years, where cemeteries are. And in the long history of human occupation of Britain, that is just like a blip on that timeline. And sometimes we will actually take extra steps to try and predict where these cemeteries are in terms of doing like a geophysical survey with like ground penetrating radar or magnetometry or whatever. But there is no such thing as like a perfect ground X-ray. And in this situation, they actually did have geophysical work done before the excavation started, which didn't turn up anything. So this cemetery came to them as a complete surprise, even though they had taken the steps to try and see if there was going to be something there prior to commencing work. In this case, we can't make everybody happy. And because, the developer wants to get on with work, but people might want these people to stay in the ground, and we have to kind of find a common ground, a compromise between these two. And in terms of the archaeology, our compromise is that we remove these people from their graves, but we do it as completely as possible to make sure that the bodies stay intact, because that's often what the very important part is that you stay together. And then if we might end up doing analysis on them. Then when it comes to a lot of the time Christian burials, we will actually do a reburial after the skeletons have been analyzed. So there are several cases of this happening. The most famous case of this happening is King Richard III, found under a car park and then reburied with proper ceremony and everything after they had done some analysis on his bones. This does happen to regular cemeteries as well. I should also mention that, again, money does come into this, because it's very, some people might think that they should just, in these cases, redesign their plans for development to avoid this area, which in general would be ideal. But in these cases where you don't actually know that something's there, it's going to cost a lot of money to completely redesign your plans and put everything elsewhere, especially if the whole process of the construction has already started. And that's just not realistic. So again, money is a factor in this, and I know that people probably don't like that, but that is just the way that it is. Additionally, if we were to change plans every single time we came across a skeleton in the UK, there would be a lot of development that would not be happening. This harks back to this idea that I don't think people really think about the fact that UK and the world has been occupied by humanity for a very, very long time. And all those people would have a way of disposing of their dead. Sometimes they're cremated, which we don't find as often. A lot of the time they're buried, or which is also known as inhumation. Actually, we only see a percentage of all the people that were buried because of various soil and ground conditions can cause skeletons to disintegrate. There's a lot of more people in the ground than I think people really think about. UK is a very small country, and we just don't have the space to be able to move things every time we come across a human burial. And so this is why we will remove the remains, keep them together, and then potentially rebury them at a later date. There are some places where they will actually redesign things for if they come across human remains unexpectedly. And I know that this is something that happens in Canada, but it's also a very different set of circumstances, because in Canada, a lot of the time if you find human remains randomly, you can pretty much guarantee that that is going to be a First Nations, Native American burial, and that is a very sensitive topic for them. And that is a entirely different kind of can of worms that I don't want to get too much into, but basically because of the way that Canada treats archaeology, especially in regards to First Nations, they try to really give them a lot of say in what's going on. So if they are uncomfortable with something going on, they can kind of say, no, I want you to leave this alone. And First Nations, in my experience, tend to have very strong cultural beliefs around the dead. Much stronger than we tend to have as Christians even nowadays, in that you're not supposed to like say a dead person's name, you're not supposed to be like around a dead person's body, and so they also don't want them disturbed. So in that case, a lot of the time things will get moved. But again, Canada, second largest country in the world, we got a lot of space to move things to. It's not as big of a deal as it would be somewhere like the UK. Okay, so I think I've covered all the main points here. I really felt like I needed to speak out on this particular topic. If you disagree with me, I mean, you disagree. I can't help that. But I felt like the original way that everything was taken portrayed archaeology very negatively. Now, the council actually replied to some of these news stories saying that it's standard practice to not publicize burials until after they've been excavated, but this literally just showed up in the news stories as a sentence. It wasn't even really considered. It was just a blip in the entire story so that they were giving the official tagline, but then sensationalized the rest of it to make it seem like it was, even though it was how they usually do things, it shouldn't be. In archaeological circles, we were all sitting there being like, I can't believe that this is getting this much press. This guy trespassed onto a site, violating its security. He actually said something in his following post about people contacting him for the location so they could metal detect it. But nobody in the archaeological community really spoke out publicly about it. And that's fine, because we don't really have like one particular body that represents all of us, you know, and we realize that people can get very upset about this topic, and we don't really want to rock the boat. But I just felt like somebody kind of had to defend the archaeologists and the other side of the story, so that when you're looking at it, you're getting a bit of a broader picture instead of just the bias on one side. So I hope I've done this without ranting too much. Like I said, this is a topic that as a commercial archaeologist and an osteologist, I have quite a bit of experience with, and I hope I've explained things for you guys in a way that you can understand, and maybe you now have a bit more knowledge of the way things are done. And so the next time that you see something going on with an excavation, instead of getting upset about it, you might just have a second thought and be like, oh wait, maybe I should just, wait a little while and it'll show up on the news. And even if it doesn't show up on the news, if you take a note of the developer or the archaeological company and try and contact them to ask what's going on, a lot of the times they will be happy to engage with you about that. But yeah, this is like a huge PR issue within archaeology, and I know that there are probably people who will disagree with parts that I said, but I've tried to be as a fair and thorough as possible. So if I've missed anything, please let me know. If you have any questions or comments, as per usual, put them down in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up if you feel like it, and please subscribe to my channel. As per usual, if you want to follow me on any of my social media, I have them in the description box below, so go ahead and join me on there. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this video and that you've learned a little bit more about the world of archaeology. Thank you so much, guys, for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!